So we're sitting at least a metre apart. We're having our own version of social distancing in the studio in which we record the Royal Rota. Anyone watching this on YouTube can see there is more distance between thee and me.
Yep.
For sure.
We haven't fallen out.
Not
we're just taking
bad
advice.
About coronavirus. But there was us thinking that this could be a very, very quiet and short edition of the Royal Rota this week because basically the royal family have cancelled everything. And yet... it's not
quite a long list of things that have happened.
And as we stepped into the studio, the Queen has just issued a message to the nation. We will go through that in a second. So, I mean, a lot of things were cancelled, but then a lot of things have happened in relation to COVID-19. Just do your Robinson's Royal Rundown first, and then let's try and dissect and pull apart some of the things and how this worldwide crisis is affecting our own royal family.
So this week started with some changes to schedules. The tour that Charles and Camilla were due to be on was postponed. That was announced last Friday.
Which we were discussing in the studio last week about I can't see how it could go ahead. And then
it seems mad to think that only a week ago we were even having a conversation that we'd possibly
could go.
That seems unthinkable now. But that was announced officially on Friday last week that it would be postponed. And there was also an announcement from Buckingham Palace that some of the Queen's diary would change. So she had visits to Cheshire and Camden planned and they were going to be rescheduled. But since then, we've had further announcements from Buckingham Palace about big changes to the Queen's diary, which we'll go through bit by bit in the podcast. We've had a video message from Prince William this week. He's recorded a message for the National Emergency Trust appeal for funding. Yes,
and became the first member of the royal family to talk about coronavirus by so doing. Again, we'll come to that shortly.
Harry and Meghan posted on Instagram this week, on their Sussex Royal Instagram account this week, about coronavirus as well. We had the news that a state visit from Japan was due to be postponed as well. And Prince Albert of Monaco, go to another royal family for a minute, has tested positive for coronavirus. We found that out today.
And yet he did. He was in the same room as Prince Charles just 9 days ago. So anyway, let's start. I mean, my goodness. I mean, what a changed world we are in compared to when we were sitting here this time last week, talking about Harry and Meghan bowing out of the royal family. We're now talking about a royal family that's having to respond to a global emergency and make their own changes. And given the age of the Queen, 93, nearly 94, given the age of the Duke of Edinburgh, 98, a lot of concern because they are in the most vulnerable group possible.
And not just them, of course, Charles and Camilla are both in their 70s, so they come under that age group of being encouraged to distance themselves socially and protect themselves. So suddenly, members of the royal family we're probably not going to see for a while.
Quite. So there's been a lot of talk over the last few days, and perhaps one of the questions I've been asked most often has been, when's the Queen going to say something? Are we going to hear from the Queen? Is she going to make an address to the nation? Is she going to say something? That was all answered this afternoon. We had a statement from Buckingham Palace. There are some very interesting passages from the Queen in there. Should we just read through a bit of that? Do you want to read through a bit of the Queen's statement?
Yeah, so she starts off by saying that as Philip and her arrive at Windsor today.
We've got to talk about the fact they're at Windsor.
We'll talk about that.
Right.
But she says, we know that many individuals and families across the United Kingdom and around the world are entering a period of great concern and uncertainty.
And I'll do the next bit. She says, we're all being advised to change our normal routines and regular patterns of life for the greater good of the communities we live in, and in particular to protect the most vulnerable within them.
At times such as these, I'm reminded that our nation's history has been forged by people and communities coming together to work as one, concentrating our combined efforts with a focus on the common goal.
We are enormously thankful, says the Queen, for the expertise and commitment of our scientists, medical practitioners and emergency and public services. But now more than any time in our recent past, we all have a vitally important part to play as individuals. Today, she writes, and in the coming days, weeks and months.
And she finishes, many of us will need to find new ways of staying in touch with each other and making sure that loved ones are safe. I am certain we're up to that challenge. You can be assured that my family and I stand ready to play our part.
Now that's the kind of not over dramatic, not overly urgent, but very measured and Queenie, you could say.
Yeah, and
signed Elizabeth R.
Yeah, and she's a very stabilising figure, and I think
which
that's
is what the country kind of needs.
Why people wanted to hear from her. I mean, we've heard from royals in other parts of the world, so I think it was only a matter of time before the Queen spoke.
And I mean, look at that part where she speaks about at times such as these, I'm reminded that our nation's history has been forged by people coming together to work as one with a focus on the common goal. I think clearly she's referencing the war years there, years that she lived through as a young teenager, and also years in which her father, King George VI, and her mother, Queen Elizabeth, latterly the Queen Mother, stayed at Buckingham Palace and survived the Blitz. And it's kind of, I mean, there's so many times that people have said recently, this is a bit like we need a wartime spirit. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister in the UK, is talking about wartime government. Yeah. Every government in America, Donald Trump is trying to deal with this. Everyone's trying to deal with this massive, massive story.
And I think when she talks about us being advised to change normal routines and regular patterns of life, she's reinforcing messages that we've had constantly from the government in the last week about, avoiding places where, you normally go to socialise, and having a message like that from the Queen maybe will cut through to people that it's not cutting through to currently.
Yeah, I think this is a point at which I think the government is almost dispatching the royal family to send out a message that they need their support with.
Because there's no way she would have done this without the government's
and
backing.
I think one of the reasons why, I mean, a lot of people are asking me for a good couple of days now, why haven't we heard from the Queen, is because she doesn't want to distract from the message that's coming from those daily press conferences from the British government, which is, yesterday was about schools, the day before was about social distancing. I mean, the Queen's, I think, very, very conscious that she doesn't want to overshadow anything that the government is doing to combat this.
I think the whole family are conscious that anything they do in the coming days and weeks, that they will work with government to ensure that they don't take away or dilute any messaging that they've got, because it's vital that those messages are getting to the public. And
to that end, there is actually something we currently can't talk about in here and have to talk about next week, something we know about that we can't actually talk about. So
possibly.
I'm very sorry to say that for now we will have to wait for that. The Queen then, so as she mentioned in her statement, I mean, here's quite a lot to talk about. She's moved to Windsor. She always has Easter Court in Windsor. That's where she goes every single year. This year she's gone a week early.
Yep.
And the other news that we got just a few hours before we came into this studio was that the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, has been flown by helicopter from Sandringham Wood Farm, where he lives, to Windsor Castle. Again, a week earlier, because he was always planned to be with the Queen for the Easter service.
And that's normal. He does normally go to
Indeed,
Windsor.
And we saw him. We saw pictures of him there in Windsor last year. I mean, we should also talk about rumours upon rumours upon rumours on social media that the Duke of Edinburgh was very ill, shall we say.
The ongoing rumours.
Yes, the ongoing rumours about that, but they did explode yesterday. It was the top trending story on Twitter. Anyway, I mean, they're both in Windsor now, but why don't you run through the change of plan that they've announced?
So, as you say, Queen is in Windsor a week earlier than planned, but they also announced this week that it's likely she'll stay there beyond the Easter period. I mean, at the moment, she's 94 next month. They're not going to want to be moving her around and having her meeting lots of different
Kind of
people.
feels like she's going to stay there for the foreseeable future, doesn't it?
Which seems sensible. We know that she often, when she's in London in the week, she spends the weekends at Windsor. She likes being in Windsor, so it doesn't seem a huge surprise that they would.
Yeah, and that's a good place for her to be. Also to carry out a bit more social distancing. Does that mean people won't go up to her? Well, no, but it just means that maybe there's just less opportunity for her to come into contact with different types of staff. I know for a fact that actually in Buckingham Palace at the moment, some are working sort of like, you go into the office today, I'll stay at home, and then we'll swap tomorrow. So that working from home thing's also happening in all the palaces.
Affecting everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Prince Philip is there. He was moved there earlier, but
he went by helicopter, and the Queen left by car with one of her dorgies.
Okay, so some really nice pictures. So the Queen came out of Buckingham Palace. Our cameras filmed her as she drove past Canada Gate outside the front of Buckingham Palace. You could just see the head of one of her dogs, a dorgie, which is a cross between a corgi and a dachshund, I think. You might know better than us. If you do, just send us a message on Twitter using hashtag Royal Rota ITV. But if you know what a dorgie is, we think a dachshund and a corgi mix.
Definitely a mix.
But have a look at this picture if you are watching on YouTube, or go and look it up on my Twitter, Chrisship ITV on Twitter. There's a great picture of the Queen in her car with one of her dogs looking out as she just trundles off to Windsor, which is, I thought, a cracking picture taken by, was it Aaron Chown at the Press Association?
So she's been at Buckingham Palace this week, and that was as planned.
Now, she had some audiences at Buckingham Palace.
Well, she was due to have 3, but she ended up only having 2 in person, and then she had her weekly audience with the Prime Minister.
On the phone?
On the phone.
Right. So Boris Johnson was meant to go in last night for his face-to-face weekly audience. That was changed at the last minute. They decided
that it would be better to do that over the phone.
But she had contact with, or at least been in the same room as both the outgoing and incoming commanders of HMS Queen Elizabeth, the Royal Navy aircraft carrier, the big brand new one named after her. Is the word eponymous, isn't it? Named after her. The HMS Queen Elizabeth, anyway. And the outgoing and incoming commanders came in to see her. There was no handshaking, was there?
No handshaking, but they bowed.
Yes.
And she also had the Bishop of Hereford in this week as well. But I mean, Buckingham Palace say future audiences will be reviewed on an ongoing basis in line with appropriate advice.
I wouldn't have thought she'd be having very many.
I can't think there'll be many.
OK, so the other coronavirus change was Maundy service, the sort of annual Maundy service, which is on Thursday, the 9th of April this year, the day before Good Friday. Normally there's this sort of exchange of money and big crowds gather in
St George's Chapel, where Harry and Meghan and Princess Eugenie got married. And yes, crowds gather, there's lots of people, lots of contact, so that's not going ahead.
So we think that's been cancelled not just to stop the Queen from meeting lots of people, but actually just to stop lots of crowds gathering to see the Queen. And we are having in this country social distancing measures, as they are in many other countries as well.
Yeah,
and that was an obvious reason to cancel it.
Royals attract people, and having gatherings of people at the moment is not a good idea.
This isn't the time to be attracting people.
And so another thing that's gone are there are 3 garden parties hosted by the Queen. I think
that's
my
my
phone's
phone
going crazy.
Probably saying that something is
afoot.
Quite urgent. If it is urgent, I'll let you know. But,
Good, thanks.
Anyway, you carry on.
So 3 garden parties hosted by the Queen were due to be held at Buckingham Palace in May, and now not going to take place. And 2 further garden parties that were going to be hosted by charities, the Not Forgotten Association and the National Trust, are also not going to take place. And investitures will be rearranged for later dates.
Right. That pinging, by the way, was Harry and Meghan issuing a message, but they were just reposting the statement from the Queen.
But they have posted
and
a
we
message,
can
which
come
we'll
on
go
to
through
Harry and Meghan's message shortly. So those garden parties, I mean, they attract like thousands of people every time, like 2,000 people a time or something.
Big.
It's quite a lot, isn't it? We've been to them before. We went last year. Didn't you go in the rain? And I went for a different one in the sunshine, I think, last year.
Mine was
right?
very rainy last year.
Yes, no, mine wasn't.
Very
but I do remember a lot of people being in the Buckingham Palace garden. That's binned.
Yeah, guests who are invited to garden parties hosted by the Queen will be asked to attend the following year. So
following year, so what, they're going to have double the size or just fewer people?
Well, I guess.
The other thing that's changed in terms of Buckingham Palace garden is that Princess Beatrice has had to announce that she's cancelling her wedding reception, which was due to take place in the gardens of Buckingham Palace. I mean, look, a lot of people have said to me, poor old Beatrice, here she is. She's had to scale down her wedding in terms of the size of it because of everything that's happened with her father, Prince Andrew, and now she's having to make further changes to the muted wedding that she was going to have by royal standards anyway, because of coronavirus.
Yep, but we should be clear that they're not cancelling the wedding.
No.
That there's been some reports that she's cancelling it or postponing it. As it stands,
still going ahead.
The wedding is going ahead
in the Chapel Royal inside St James's Palace, but whatever they're doing for a reception ain't happening in Buckingham Palace.
That's not happening, and I think they'll review on an ongoing basis the size of the wedding at the chapel.
And we should be clear that actually she's not the only person who's probably going to have to make wedding change plans. There are thousands of people across this country and many more around the world who are probably having to make changes.
Edo's got Italian relatives.
Yeah.
So,
of course,
travelling at the moment is
Yes, in the UK, there's a 30-day ban on all travel. I mean, Italy's in lockdown in large parts of Italy because of coronavirus. My goodness, I mean, what a time. So that was the other big change was for Princess Beatrice. Do you want to run through? So I just mentioned Harry and Meghan. Then they've obviously just reposted the Queen's statement that we've read at the top of this podcast. By the way, if you want to get this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, just search Royal Road to ITV. You can then subscribe and then get it every single week if you so wish. Otherwise, continue watching on YouTube. I know many tens of thousands of you are, so thank you for continuing to do that. Harry and Meghan. They've left the royal family. They're in Canada. Actually, someone said to me earlier that the British Columbia, where they're living, is a place that's had to go into some sort of emergency measures. I don't know the detail on that, but wherever they are, and we think they're still there, they've issued a message.
Yep, on their as it's currently called, Sussex Royal Instagram account.
Yeah, soon to be Sussex Not Royal Instagram account.
Something else. Yeah, they issued quite a long, we call it a statement, some words from them anyway this week, talking about the uncertain times and how we need each other more than ever, and we're all searching for truth, for support, and to feel less alone, and times which can feel quite scary. Which is true. I think they do. And
actually, Harry's not the only one who's got involved in coronavirus, because Prince William became the first to speak about it publicly, because it is quite interesting. Anyone who in the UK might know a scheme called the Disasters Emergency Committee, which is triggered when there's a international disaster, a disaster overseas where we want to raise funds in this country. A lot of charities come together, they raise funds, they send packages and aid overseas. Last year, I remember the event actually, William launched something called the National Emergencies Trust, and that was to do something very similar, but for when there's a domestic disaster. And I thought what was quite interesting about his video statement he did for them was, I dreaded the day we would have to trigger this, and that day's come.
Coronavirus, he said, has triggered it faster than any of us would have hoped.
Should we listen to his full message he put on the website for the campaign for the National Emergencies Trust?
Whenever and wherever adversity strikes, the people of the United Kingdom have a unique ability to pull together. The way that local communities support those affected shows the very best of our values and human nature. The public's desire to help in the wake of tragedy needs to be managed and channeled in the best possible way, which is why the establishment of the National Emergencies Trust was so important. I said at its launch last year that I dreaded the day when it would be needed. Sadly, with the outbreak of COVID-19, that day has come faster than any of us would have hoped. But now, more than ever, I'm grateful that the National Emergencies Trust exists. It will ensure that support reaches those across the UK who need it most as quickly and efficiently as possible. And it will help to ensure that all our efforts to overcome this challenge are channeled in the best possible way.
So I dreaded the day that this would have to happen, and now it's happened. So that is a place where you can go if you, by the way, you do want to make donations, as Prince William said, for people who are in desperate need. And I think that shows the kind of place we're at the moment, isn't it? Very, very different to a week ago. Very different to sort of 4 or 5
days ago. Yeah,
quite remarkable.
Very quickly.
On coronavirus, so they announced today, I mean this has all been happening today, that Prince Albert of Monaco has tested positive for coronavirus, but we've also established that he was in the same room as Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, 9 days ago on the 10th of March.
Yep, they were at a climate change event, but as we say, that was 10 days ago now.
Right. So, I mean, some people say that you can actually be infectious for something like 14 days. Some people say it's a little bit less than that. I got the impression today when we asked Clarence House about it, they weren't massively worried. They don't comment on health,
and
so
also
we have to read between the lines, don't we?
One of the people there did say they don't recall any handshakes or anything, and that's obviously
we
one of the
were talking last week about Prince Charles doing all his namaste gestures, weren't we? When he was went to the Prince's Trust and everything was like this. I can't imagine why then on the 10th of March, when he had this water aid summit, that he would suddenly be shaking everyone's hand and it's not as if they'd be sneezing over each other. So I mean, it would have to be something pretty significant for him.
Yeah, I didn't get the impression there was too much concern, though.
It's too much emergency. But although they never comment on health, they don't comment on the Duke of Edinburgh's health. They don't comment on, whether or not Prince Charles has got coronavirus.
No.
Anyway, it's serious times all round. Do we think there's going to be much happening next week? It kind of feels like it's all shut down. But
yeah, although I think we thought this week there'd be not a lot to talk about. I think we might have
change today.
It wouldn't surprise me if there were some things to talk about next week, although I can't currently say what.
Yes, this is the thing that we hinted about earlier.
Yeah.
We can't say who or what or when, but anyway, something else to talk about. But the Queen will be at Windsor. Duke of Edinburgh will be at Windsor. Kind of probably not doing very much, but I think the country is looking to the royal family at the moment for some sort of stability. Kind of the way I remember when the Queen. It might be good if we can dig out the pictures of this. But when the Queen went to Grenfell to meet the survivors after the terrible fire at Grenfell Tower, every so often she knows when she needs to step in. Like it's famously said that she regrets not going earlier to the Aberfan disaster in the mid-1960s. The Queen knows, she sort of can gauge when is the time to do these things, and she's done it in a statement today.
In a very calming, considered, measured
again, not video, it's
way.
just words.
Yeah.
You wonder whether she might, for the Queen to make a video message, I just wonder, like, you're talking, she doesn't do it. She does it at Christmas time every year. She did it famously for Princess Diana, a message to the nation. For her to do it on camera has to be of a very serious magnitude, doesn't it?
But also, as we know from working in television, the people involved in creating something like that, you don't, maybe they don't want people in a room with her.
Yeah, you can put out a statement very quickly. You can't get camera teams and all the rest of it in there anymore. My phone just buzzed again, so I'm just checking there was nothing else I need to
mention while we're still here.
While we're here.
No?
So anyway, next week, yes, there's something we will be able to talk about. Let's just see where we are in terms of the coronavirus and all the rest of it.
I think things are changing very quickly.
Yeah,
so.
we're keeping everything shorter today. They are very serious times at the moment, not just for this country, but for wherever you're watching or listening to this in the world. That is the Royal Rota. We are trying to do this every week, as you well know. Search Royal Rota ITV on YouTube, Spotify, any of your podcast platforms. But these are difficult times for everybody, every family, whether you're royal, not royal, wherever you live in the world. So stay safe and stay well.